What if one mistake, one forgotten detail, meant your entire family would eat rotten meat, not in a far-off apocalypse, in the middle of a real, brutal winter, in a village frozen at 10 o'clock at night, no fire left, no second chances. Charm, smell, hidden by the cold, the texture deceptive, the danger lurking inside every bite. It's the 18th century. Snow covers the earth, the livestock are long gone. Your children are crying, and the only meat left is wrapped in silence and hope. If it's spoiled, you might not wake up tomorrow. This wasn't survival fiction. This was life, and the line between food and death was thinner than the knife. That sliced it. Tonight we travel back to a time where sunlight was your fridge, and one ancient technique could mean life or a slow, silent poison. So, would you survive? In this video, you'll discover the forbidden techniques medieval peasants used to keep meat safe through the deadliest winters, and why forgetting them meant facing death with your eyes wide open. The fire was nearly out. Only a slow, orange pulse in the ashes, barely enough to light the inside of the cabin. Outside, the wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls, carrying with it the scent of ice and something else, decay. Eirik turned the piece of meat in his hands. Its surface had hardened from smoke, but a dampness lingered underneath. His fingers shook, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. He held the meat close to his face. No smell, or perhaps he could no longer tell. His youngest daughter had stopped eating 2 days ago. The salted fish had turned sour. This was all. They had left. In the 18th century, in the far north, winter didn't knock. It invaded. At 3 in the morning, under skies of iron and frost, choices disappeared. You ate or buried someone. Back then, in villages where survival without technology meant trusting fire, wind, and instinct, knowledge wasn't a luxury. It was the only shield between life and decay. This wasn't about cooking. It was ancestral engineering, born from desperation and sharpened by cold. One mistake didn't mean inconvenience, it meant sickness, weakness, sometimes death. Long before we measured warmth in numbers or believed in the illusion of comfort, they turned to something far older, something silent, ancient, and essential: the sun. In warmer months, medieval peasants would slice meat into thin, trembling strips and hang them outside, angled perfectly toward the strongest light. The sun cured it, the wind sealed it. There were no thermometers, only eyes and touch. And if it rained, you moved everything at once. One wrong hour could rot an entire season's hope. But when the sun vanished and the sky turned to ice, another technique surfaced: smoke, slow burning. Wood, mostly from green branches, filled the cabin with a dark haze. Meat hung above it for days, weeks. It absorbed the smoke, hardened, became almost leather. In the thick fog of winter breath, this leathery meat was gold. Not soft, not flavorful, but safe. And safe meant everything. Eirik's ancestors had passed down these techniques not with words, but with habits, movements, rituals. The turning of the meat each morning, the smell of the smoke when it was just right. Not too dry, not too sweet. A father taught it to his son. And now, in this moment, Eirik stood alone, wondering if he remembered it right. He placed the meat over the embers and closed his eyes. His daughter's coughing echoed from the sleeping corner. The stakes had never been higher. And so I ask you, if tomorrow you lost your fridge, your heat, your comfort, would you know what to do? Or would you eat and pray you guessed right? Leave your opinion in the comments. Long before refrigeration existed, before plastic, expiration dates, and the illusion of control, survival on the frozen frontiers of medieval Europe rested on something older than memory. Something that didn't hum, didn't glow, and didn't forgive. It rested on the sun. When autumn crept in, not with falling leaves, but with a wind that bit like a blade, medieval peasants prepared for war. Not with armor, with meat. They sliced it into ribbons, thin enough for the wind to pass through, thick enough to keep the soul of the flesh intact. They didn't do it for flavor. They did it because they knew. The first snow wasn't a sign of winter. It was the sound of time running out. Strips of meat were hung on wooden poles just out of reach of rats, dogs, and desperate hands. Every sunrise was a chance to preserve life. Every sunset, a gamble. The meat had to be turned. Every single day, one shadow could invite rot. One fly meant sickness. One cloud at the wrong hour could erase an entire month of work. This wasn't cooking. This was survival with surgical precision. Some hung their meat along the sunniest walls of their homes. Others built wooden frames in open fields where the wind could wrap the flesh like a cloak of vigilance. Children were trained not to play, but to listen. to the crackling of drying skin, to the way the breeze shifted on a dying afternoon, to the moment when scent crossed from earthy to dangerous. There was no second chance, no store, no help, no restart, just silence and time and instinct. And it wasn't just about food, it was about trust, in ancestral hands, in rituals, older than maps, in the rhythm of earth itself, ancient, unspoken and brutal, and in that rhythm, in that stillness, there was something sacred, the heat of the sun on your fingers as you turned a slice of meat that might keep your child alive. One more day, a fragile hope, a quiet defiance against the hunger on the horizon. But the sun didn't always come, so when the skies turned grey and the frost came early, would you know what to do? Or would you simply wait for the cold to decide? But the sun wasn't, always loyal. When clouds swallowed the sky, when the light refused to break through for days, especially deep into autumn, the villagers turned to something darker, more primal, fire, not to cook, but to protect. In the cold corners of the northern lands, medieval peasants began building what looked like small huts, low and sealed, made of branches, mud and stone. Inside they placed racks above a slow fire, but this wasn't a fire for heat. It was smoke they wanted. Thick, wet, alive. They burned. Green wood not yet dry, so it smoldered, curling into a white fog that clung to everything. For days, sometimes more than a week, they hung strips of meat inside these makeshift tents. The smoke kissed every surface, entering cracks, drying edges, creating an invisible armor against time itself. This wasn't fast, and it wasn't pretty. The smoke stung the eyes, darkened the walls, and left a bitter taste in your mouth. But the meat, once cured, could outlast snowstorms, hunger, and even the madness that came with not knowing where the next meal would come from. It was like painting the meat with fire, and not everyone could do it right. Too much smoke and the meat turned bitter. Too little and it spoiled. The balance had to be felt, not measured. Smelled, not timed. This was forgotten wisdom, not science. Soul. And in the heart of those frozen villages, where the cold bit deeper than any blade, this technique saved lives, quietly. Smoke became a silent guardian, a ghost that clung to meat and kept death away just a little longer. There are no plugins, no step-by-step YouTube videos, just instinct, memory, and the will to endure. And if that surprised you even just a little, if this ancient dance with fire gave you chills, then leave a like and subscribe, because what comes next might feel even more impossible. But they did it, and they survived. Would you? Today the power goes out for 3 days, and we panic. We throw away milk that's barely warm. We stare at meat, untouched, as if it's already poisonous. We don't sniff. We don't test. We just obey the label, the timer, the hum of a machine. That tells us when to feel safe. We trust expiration dates more than our own instincts. We live wrapped in artificial warmth, guarded by blinking lights and buzzing systems. But what if that illusion is shattered tonight? Imagine it's 10 o'clock at night, there's no power, no signal, just cold and silence. You open the fridge. It's nothing more than a box filled with fear. What would you eat on the 4th day? Would you trust your eyes, your fingers, your nose? Would you even recognize what safe smells like? Now step back, into a time without warning labels, back to the 18th century, where meat wasn't judged by date, but by feel, by scent, by heat and memory. Campanese's medieves didn't throw food away because it looked strange. They examined it, spoke to it in gestures and smoke. They knew what rot smelled like. They knew the weight of dried muscle between the teeth. They knew the difference between maybe and deadly. In those frozen villages, there was no luxury of fear. You didn't play it safe. You chose eat or bury the weak. And hunger in a brutal winter isn't poetic. It's quiet. It's sharp. It's the sound of a child's breath fading in the dark. And still, they endured. Not with faith in miracles, but in memory, in techniques burned into the skin of the hands, not pages, in wisdom passed down not as knowledge, but as survival. So when someone today says, "That looks bad," I wonder, do they really know what bad is? Or have we become too soft to tell the difference between discomfort and death? Because when the cold returns, and it always does, it won't ask if we're ready. And the only question left will hang in the air like old smoke. If the lights went out tomorrow, would you survive or starve surrounded by food you no longer understand? There were families, quiet ones, who whispered to the soil. They didn't speak aloud about their methods, not because they were ashamed, but because they knew the earth doesn't like arrogance. They trusted it like an old god, one that fed, Gyabitun, and buried you. In the darkest corners of the village, beneath walls stitched together by frozen mud and brittle straw, they lowered clay pots into the ground. Inside, layer after layer of meat lay pressed between fists of coarse salt, each piece positioned like a prayer. Each pot sealed with wax or cloth soaked in lard, as if sealing away not just meat but fate. And then they buried them, not for hiding, not for convenience, but as ritual. Because the salt, when cold and dry, pulled the danger from the flesh. It hardened it, preserved it, turned it into something sacred. But one crack in the lid, one warm wind, and the salt turned soft, wet, useless. The pot became a tomb, and the meat a quiet execution. In the dead cold of the 18th century, when temperatures barely scraped 20 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to -6 Celsius, this method was both salvation and gamble. A silent game played only by those who respected the cruelty of the land. They didn't use timers. They didn't have safety guidelines. They had silence, discipline, and scars left by every mistake that came before. No one told the children not to touch. They just didn't, because they'd heard the stories, and some pots once opened didn't smell like meat. They smelled like death. Today we refrigerate out of habit. We seal food in plastic because we're told to. We've forgotten that preservation was once a holy act, that storing meat was a negotiation between man and earth, and the price of getting it wrong was buried in shallow graves. That's why no one speaks of this technique anymore, because it wasn't just about keeping meat alive. It was about keeping your family from dying with it. So tell me, if the stores closed tomorrow, and all you had was a pot, some salt, and frozen ground, would you know what to do, or would you wait for a warning label that never comes? So now, let's step away from history for just a second. Let's step into your kitchen, your hands, your instinct. If tomorrow everything shut down, no electricity, no running water, no refrigeration, if the night came like it did in the frozen villages of the 18th century, what would you do? Would you slice meat thin and trust the sun? Would you build a hut of smoke and pray the fire stayed low? Would you bury salt and meat in the earth like a silent oath, whispering to the soil to keep it safe? Which of these techniques would you try? Not as a medieval reenactment, not as a survival game, but as a parent, a brother, a woman with nothing but instinct and hunger and time, because that's all they had. No manuals, no backup generators, no second opinions, just the wind, the smell of the fire, the silence of snow, and their own hands. And I'm asking this not just as a narrator, but as someone who feels the same chill when thinking of collapse. Would I know what to do? Would you? So tell me in the comments, if the grid fell tonight, what would you try first? And hold on to that thought, because the next method, let's just say call it borders on magic, on madness, on something that even today many would laugh at. But back then, in the hunger-ridden corners of a medieval winter, it worked, and for some, it saved everything. Are you ready to see it? In the frozen silence of the 18th century, where wind seeped through walls and hope was counted in mouthfuls, some medieval peasants did something strange. They took the meat, already smoked or dried, and dipped it, carefully, into melted animal fat, sometimes pork, sometimes beef. Then they mixed that fat with crushed herbs, wild thyme, sage, sometimes garlic, whatever they could forage before the snow sealed the earth. And then they poured it over the meat, not to flavor it, but to seal it. A thick, waxy layer formed, a natural tomb, a living lid. This wasn't a recipe. This was armor, a sacred coating against time, air, and rot. Inside clay pots or leather pouches, hidden beneath beds or in the coldest corners of cabins, these waxed meats could survive for months, sometimes longer. The fat hardened like candle wax, and beneath it, untouched by oxygen or bacteria, the meat slept. No ice, no preservation chemicals, just instinct, just technique, just forgotten wisdom passed from grandmother to granddaughter in whispers beside the fire. The herbs didn't just protect, their smell warned of spoilage. If the fat turned sour, the scent would tell you first. They had no laboratories. Their senses were the lab. Their survival was the result. Imagine holding a piece of food buried in grease and wild leaves, and knowing it could be your final reserve, the last safe bite before spring thaw. It feels primitive, maybe even grotesque, but it worked. It saved lives when the snow fell too early, when the rats found the cellar, when the baby was still nursing and the storm wouldn't end. This wasn't just technique. It was defiance. Against time. Against hunger. Against the belief that only the modern world has answers. And if you've stayed with us until now, if this journey through medieval survival, through buried salt and smoked air and fat-sealed meat, still stirs something in you, if you feel the echo of that cold, that hunger, that fight, then leave a like, subscribe, stay close, because we're just getting started. And the worst winter, it's still ahead. What would you eat when everything else is gone? But what happened when it all failed, when the sun vanished behind endless grey, when the firewood hissed with wetness instead of burning, when the salt turned to sludge and the fat cracked like old bones in the cold? That's when they met the edge, not the romantic edge of survival, the raw, cruel one. Eric knew that smell. Not rot, not stench, but the whisper, that sour breath that hides behind smoke and damp wood. It crept into the house like guilt, like warning. And still, he fed it to his sons, because by then, there was no room for doubt, only time and hunger. He sliced away the black, peeled off the mold. The meat sagged like wet cloth, limp, grey, silent. He warmed it near the fire, not to cook, but to hope. The youngest never woke up. The eldest lived. But fever took his mind. He shook. He whispered to the walls. He called his mother, long buried. He laughed at shadows. He screamed at nothing. That was the line. Not between cooked and raw, not even between hunger and fullness, but between humanity. And whatever comes after it breaks. In the 18th century, when temperatures dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to -6 Celsius, food poisoning didn't mean stomach pain. It meant slow death. It meant watching color leave the face of your child. It meant kneeling on dirt floors at 3 in the morning, whispering not to heaven, but to the meat, begging it to be kind, begging it not to lie. That was the true war of winter, a quiet war. Fought not with swords, but with bites, bites you weren't sure would heal you or bury you, and still they endured, because what choice did they have? So now I ask, if your child sat before you crying of hunger, and the only food left had already turned, would you feed it to them, or would you wait for silence to take them first? Over time, Eric stopped fearing the meat, not because it became cleaner, not because it smelled better, but because he changed. He became a listener, not to voices, but to textures, to the faint snap of a properly dried strip, to the shape of smoke when the fire was just right, not roaring, not lazy, but honest. There was language in it, music in decay, a rhythm carved by necessity. His fingers could feel when the fat was sealed tight. His nose could tell the difference between hope and hazard. And his eyes, tired but sharpened by hunger, stopped, searching for perfection. They looked for truth, the truth of time, the truth of rot, the truth that survival wasn't something you stored. It was something you read, like bark, like wind, like silence. There were no thermometers, no manuals, no second chances. There was only presence, presence in the smoke, in the meat, in the hunger, in the hands that fed and feared in the same breath. He didn't survive because he had tools. He survived because he noticed things modern people forget to see, like the way the wind shifts through a broken window at 10 o'clock at night, or how the cold speaks first through your feet, then your bones, how animals grow still before a storm, how snow gets heavy when death is near. He didn't fight the winter. He listened to it. He didn't store food. He stored awareness. And that's what kept them alive. Not strength, not luck, but reverence. So tell me, if you couldn't search your way out of a crisis, if your screens went black and your books were gone, would your body remember what to do? Or would you wait for permission from a world that may no longer exist? And what if it all happened again, not in some distant apocalypse, not in a movie, but here, now? What if, tomorrow, the grid failed? The lights stayed off past dinner. The phone never reconnected, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was permanent. No heat, no clean water, no soft hum of modern life protecting you from the cold. What would you do? Would you panic? Wait for a rescue that might never come? Or would you remember? Would your hands recall what Eric's hands once knew? Would you slice, salt, seal, and smoke? Would you look at meat not with fear, but with focus? Most people today would look at a raw cut and see danger, see confusion, see something meant for a package, a barcode, a best before date. But the medieval peasants didn't see meat like that. They saw time, they saw risk and possibility wrapped in flesh. They saw their children's next heartbeat hidden in every layer. So I ask you again, if tomorrow comes like the winters of the 18th century, without warning, without mercy, would you be ready? Or would you stare at a piece of meat and see nothing but fear? Because the truth is, we are never as far from the past as we think. The snow always returns, and when it does, only those who remember will rise with the thaw. So tell me, are you learning to remember, or are you just hoping? The cold never comes for you? Eirik was no legend. He had no special strength, no secret knowledge passed down in scrolls, no divine intervention in the middle of a snowstorm. He was just a man, with cracked hands, tired eyes, and the kind of silence that only fathers carry. When the firewood runs low and the mouths around them won't stop asking if food is coming, he was afraid of getting it wrong, of cutting the meat too late, of trusting the smoke too much, afraid of losing what little he had left. But still, he learned, he listened, he adapted, not because he wanted to thrive, but because he refused to watch his family vanish beneath the frost. And in that refusal, there he became something extraordinary, because in the heart of the 18th century, in a world colder than we remember and harder than we like to admit, survival didn't belong to the strongest. It belonged to the most attentive, to those who looked at a slab of meat and didn't see dinner but danger and possibility, to those who knew that salt could save, but only if you respected its silence, to those who didn't wait for help but became the help. Eirik didn't have the luxury of forgetting, and that's why he made it through, because the meat didn't save them. The knowledge did, the reverence did, the willingness to listen to the whispers of fire, fat, smoke, and earth did, and maybe in the end, that's all survival really is. Remembering what few still know, and doing what almost no one dares to try again. If this journey through medieval survival stirred something ancient within you, then your place is among us. Join the brotherhood of those who remember, the guardians of forgotten wisdom. Subscribe now and carry this flame forward, and tell us sincerely, soul to soul, which ancestral technique would you trust when the snow returns and the silence grows heavy? Leave your answer in the comments. Your words may awaken someone's instinct to prepare. A simple like them, it's more than support. It's a sign you believe this knowledge matters. It's a spark against the forgetting. And if you feel this matters, share it. Because in an age where we've lost so much, sharing ancient knowledge might save someone more than you know. But don't stop here. Another door is opening. The next video is already waiting, and in it lies the next step in your rite of preparation. Click in and walk deeper into the path of the ancients. We'll meet you there.